Taz, I just got back from the cinema, as you know, and for the listeners, I just went to watch Bridget Jones' Mad About the Boy, and I was so excited for it because I don't know if you watched Bridget Jones when you was younger. Although
Yeah.
I don't know if it's like really a film that we should be watching when we're younger. I can't really remember them though, to be fair, but like I do remember them being a bit inappropriate. But anyway, I was having a really bad day today, and then my friend was like, "Do you want to come and watch Bridget Jones?" And I thought,
Yeah.
this is perfect because what better film to go and watch than Bridget Jones to make me feel
Yeah.
better about my own life? However, I must say it was absolutely awful, and I was a bit disappointed with it, to be honest, because it just wasn't that great. And well, I don't want to spoil the film for anyone because it was a bit inappropriate because there was like some weird... Okay, if any of the listeners don't want spoilers, just skip forward 30 seconds. But her husband dies and then she just starts randomly dating like this 18-year-old. So it's like this 50-year-old woman who's like just dating like this 18... I don't know if he was actually 18, but it was just weird. It was a weird film, and it was some time that I wish I could get back in my life, to be honest.
I've heard very mixed feelings about the Bridget Jones films. Like, some people love it and some people didn't like it, but I think I would personally like it because the 18-year-old in question that you're talking about is Leo Woodall, and he is so fit.
I'm not gonna lie, like he did kind of make that film for me. I'm not gonna lie, but
anyone
the
who's
only thing
watched
that kept
One
me.
Day on Netflix, oh my god, that's another thing I wish I could take back. And I feel like if you've watched One Day on Netflix, do you or do you not regret watching that? Because I was absolutely broken for weeks. If you're in any kind of sadness, do not watch that series.
By the way, I don't think he's actually 18 in real life. Just to like clear that up, me and Taz aren't weirdos. We're not
no. He's not 18 in real life.
When you told me about it earlier, I was thinking like, oh, maybe I'll go and watch it, but I'm not really down for like sad films. I feel like I'm a fragile person. I also feel like I'm having a fragile week. Like, I'm a fragile person this week, so I definitely ain't starting that series this week. Like, it ain't happening.
No,
but maybe
don't start it this week. But it broke me, but it was so good. So it's hard to say. If you've watched One Day and you're listening, let us know in the comments, because I would love to know what people think and whether they would willingly watch it.
Yeah,
if they knew the outcome.
Okay, yeah, let me know, because then I'll take that on board and decide if I'm going to watch it. But anyway, so we've mentioned that we want to get our time back, or sometimes we regret doing certain things with our time. And today we are actually touching on that topic. Well, we're not just touching on it, we're doing a whole episode on it, because in today's episode, we are covering the conspiracy theory of whether or not time travel is possible. And I'm very excited for this. So let's get into today's episode.
This is Debunked by the soculturedpodcast,
hosted by Liv and Taz, two girls exploring the world of science and tech, unfiltered.
This season, we're separating fact from fiction as we dive into the world's most controversial conspiracy theories by seeing if science can prove or disprove them.
And of course, we're still serving up the laboraTEA,
because the STEM world is messier than you think.
Don't forget, all opinions are our own, and all of our listener stories are alleged. Let's get into this week's episode of Debunked.
April 23rd, 2006. It was a normal afternoon in Kiev, Ukraine, when a young man in his early 20s appeared in the city centre. He was staring wide-eyed at his surroundings. Witnesses would later describe him as looking completely lost, as if he had just woken up in a world that made no sense. He was dressed in perfectly pressed but outdated clothes, and he clutched an old-fashioned camera in his hands. His behaviour was strange, like nervous and hesitant, and he approached two police officers asking for help. "Excuse me," he asked, "can you tell me how to get to 𝗾𝘁𝗄𝗯 Street?" The officers exchanged confused looks. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but there was a problem. 𝗾𝘁𝗄𝗯 Street didn't exist anymore. So now growing suspicious, they asked for his identification. And that's when things got really strange. Sergei Ponomarenko's official documents were authentic, but they were issued by a government that hadn't existed for 15 years. They were also marked with the seal of the Soviet Union, a country that had dissolved in 1991. And the biggest shock? His birth date, 1932.
What?
If this man was telling the truth, he should have been 74 years old. But the person standing before them was no older than 25. And at first, the officers assumed that he was either lying or mentally unstable. So they decided to take him in for questioning. And that's when they noticed something else: his camera. A vintage model, well preserved, but decades out of date. And when they asked him about it, 𝘂𝗍𝗃 insisted that he had just used it earlier that day. So skeptical, the police sent the film inside to be developed. And what they found was impossible. So the images showed Kiev, not in 2006, but in the 1950s. The cars, the buildings, even the street signs matched historical records perfectly. 𝘂𝗍𝗃 himself was even in the pictures, wearing the exact same clothes that he had on that day. And by this point, the authorities were at a complete loss. If this was an elaborate prank, it was flawless. And if it was a delusion, it was a highly detailed one. So they placed 𝘂𝗍𝗃 under psychiatric observation while they figured out what to do next. But they never got the chance, because just 2 days later, 𝘂𝗍𝗃 vanished without a trace. And there was no record of his escape, no security footage of him leaving. It was as if he had simply stepped out of time. This sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel, and maybe it is, but here's the thing: this is not the only story like it. Throughout history, people have reported strange time slips, moments where the past and the present seem to blur together. For example, there's the famous story of the two Oxford academics who claimed they walked straight into 18th century Versailles. And these aren't just ghost stories, because when you start looking at how time actually works through physics, relativity, and quantum mechanics, one thing becomes clear: time is not as simple as it seems.
Oh my god, I'm excited for this episode, because we're both like quite sci-fi girlies, so I'm like, yes, please say it's real. I feel like this is so controversial to like all the conspiracy theories that we've touched on, where I've been like, no,
you've been hard against it.
Whereas this one, I'm like, I want it to be real because that is so cool.
Okay, well, there are some aspects that are definitely intriguing, I will say that. So let's get into it. So if time travel is real, then the most important question isn't how, it's why. Why does time seem to move in one direction? Like, why can we remember the past but not the future? And if time can be manipulated, then what does that actually even mean?
Yeah, 100%. And if we're talking about time travel, we actually need to understand what time is first, right?
Yeah, exactly. So scientifically, time is defined as the progression of events from the past to the present and into the future. But that's just how we experience it. In physics, time is treated as a dimension, just like length, width, and height. If space has 3 dimensions, then time is the 4th, and you'll often hear people refer to time as the 4th dimension. But here's where things get weird. See, unlike space, where you can obviously move freely in any direction, time only moves forward. So you can step left or right, you can move forward or backward, but you can't step into yesterday.
Right. Yeah, that makes so much sense. So why can't we move through time like we move through space?
Yeah, so the best way to understand why time only moves forward is through the concept of entropy. So entropy is essentially a measure of disorder. And the second law of thermodynamics tells us that in a closed system, like the universe, entropy always increases. So in other words, things naturally move from order to chaos over time. So we can think of a sandcastle, for example. When you first build a sandcastle, the grains of sand are all arranged in a really specific way. They're structured and they're organized into your little sandcastle. And that is low entropy. So it's a highly ordered state. But if we take that same sandcastle and we pop it in the Sahara Desert, or we leave it out in the wind, for example, over time, this sandcastle is going to collapse. The grains will get scattered, and eventually all you will have is a random pile of sand. And that is high entropy, or more disorder. Here is where time comes in. So entropy is the reason that we can actually tell the difference between the past and the future. So think about it. Why do we remember yesterday but not tomorrow? It's because the past had lower entropy and the future has higher entropy. And the increase of entropy is exactly what gives time its direction. And the entire universe started in a low entropy state, highly structured and full of energy after the Big Bang. And over billions of years, it has been getting more and more disordered. So in a way, time doesn't actually move forward on its own, but what we experience as the passage of time is really just the slow, inevitable increase of entropy throughout the universe.
Liv, I learned about this at school, and I feel like you just summed it up in the best way that I've understood that so well compared to like 3 years of like GCSE physics or however long you do physics for. So well done. That was a really good summary. So I guess to test my knowledge, if entropy could somehow stop increasing, based on what you said, would time stop too?
So that is the idea. So some theories suggest that if entropy could be reversed, time could also be reversed. But here's the catch. According to everything we know about physics, entropy actually cannot decrease overall, which means that time keeps pushing forward. So no matter what we do, like I said, things naturally move from order to disorder and time moves with them.
So that's why we can't just step back into the past like we move through space.
Yeah, exactly. So the past was a lower entropy state and the universe doesn't just go backward like that because time flows in one direction, because entropy does, and entropy cannot, like, it's always increasing rather than decreasing. Now, another really important point about time is that it doesn't flow at a fixed rate for all observers. It stretches and it shrinks depending on two things, speed and gravity. And we have covered some of these topics in previous episodes, but let's go over them. So this is all to do with Einstein and his theory of relativity. Now, there are actually two versions of his theory. Like I just said, we've got special relativity that tells us that time slows down when you're moving fast, and this is called velocity-based time dilation. And then general relativity tells us that gravity also affects time. So stronger gravity makes time run slower. And this is called gravitational time dilation, which, like I said, is a concept that we explained in our Interstellar episode in season 3. But a good way to think about the speed part is with movement. So imagine you are walking inside a train that's moving at 60 miles per hour. If you walk forward or you're walking through the train at 3 miles per hour, someone watching you from inside the train is going to see you as moving at 3 miles per hour, right? But someone outside of the train watching the train go by sees you moving at 63 miles per hour. So your speed is added to the train's. And time works the same way. So if you're moving really fast, time will literally slow down for you compared to someone standing still. And scientists proved this in 1971 with something called the 𝗾𝘂𝗃𝗃𝗃 experiment. So they took two identical atomic clocks, which are basically super precise clocks, like literally down to billionths of a second. So one of the clocks stayed on the ground and the other was flown around the world on a plane. But when the plane landed, the airborne clock was actually slightly behind the one on the ground.
I actually always think this because obviously living in Australia and you go over, obviously it's not the same thing really, but you go over different time zones. And when I always go back to the UK, I would have left Australia at like, I don't know, 7 p.m. And then I go to the UK and I land in the same day. And I'm like, this is madness. But obviously it's not the same concept, but I do just kind of relate it to like time travel in a way. But anyway, so time actually slowed down for the clock on the plane. That's what you're saying?
Yes, and this isn't just theory. It's actually something that we have to account for every single day. So astronauts on the International Space Station, which is moving at around 20,000 kilometers per hour, actually experience time slightly slower than we do here on Earth. So if you spent 6 months up there on the International Space Station, you would actually return about 0.02 seconds younger than if you had stayed here on Earth. So obviously it's barely noticeable, but what if you wanted to go further? So we have already established the faster you move, the slower time runs for you. Now, if you traveled at 99% the speed of light, time would stretch to the extreme. While you would experience just 1 year, entire centuries could pass for the rest of the world here back on Earth. So the idea is that you could step onto a spaceship, accelerate close to light speed, and leap thousands, maybe even millions of years into the future. But there's a catch. You could go forward, but the universe is designed so you could literally never come back. And Professor Brian Cox has spoken about this. Taz, we know you love Brian Cox.
I'm so glad you said that because I was about to say, love him. You got there before me.
I literally love him. And actually, I saw him do a little clip of him talking about this. And it's what motivated me to want to do this episode. Because I was like, oh my God, that sounds so interesting. So yeah, he's spoken about this. So traveling forward in time is scientifically possible, proven by Einstein's special relativity, as we've just spoke about. But the universe is designed so that time is literally a one-way road. So if you leave, the world you knew will vanish behind you. It will age faster and faster until it's literally unrecognizable. You could step into the distant future, but there's no physics, no equation, no loophole that actually lets you return and tell anyone what you saw, because they would literally all be dead by the time that you came back. Which I just think is a really simple but cool concept, is you could time travel thousands of years into the future, but by the time you got back, everyone would be dead. And I just thought that was a really cool and interesting concept, that essentially the universe is designed in a way that you can go into the future, but you can never tell anyone what you found.
Yeah, that is crazy.
But speed isn't the only thing that affects time. Obviously, we spoke about this before, but gravity does too. And this is called gravitational time dilation. And black holes are the best example. So think of space-time like a stretchy fabric. When you put something massive on it, like a planet, it will create a dip in the fabric of space-time. The bigger the object, the deeper the dip. And black holes are obviously like massive bowling balls slamming into a trampoline. So they literally make space-time sink. Now, as we said, the stronger the gravitational pull, the deeper that dip, and the slower time moves for anything inside it. Essentially, if you spent just a few days near a supermassive black hole, you would return to Earth millions of years later. So we've covered how time travel into the future is scientifically possible. Even proven, it's literally been proven, okay? So talking about the conspiracy theory of time travel, scientifically, absolutely, you can go into the future. We know this. But going backward in time, that is where things get messy. Not just technologically, but also logically. So it's not just that we don't have the right kind of machine or the tech to do this, but there are actual fundamental problems with how cause and effect works. So if traveling backward in time were possible, it would actually lead to paradoxes, which are basically situations where logic and reality break down. And one of the most famous examples, which everyone's probably heard of before, is the grandfather paradox. So imagine you travel back in time and accidentally prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother. Now, if that happens, obviously your parents wouldn't have been born, which means you wouldn't have been born. But if you were never born, then how did you time travel in the first place? So that's the paradox, right? It creates a loop that contradicts itself. So time travel, especially going backwards, actually kind of breaks reality. So if time travel to the past creates these contradictions, does that mean that it's completely impossible? Not necessarily. So some physicists argue that paradoxes don't actually happen at all because time, in a way, protects itself. And one of the most well-known solutions is the Novikov self-consistency principle proposed by physicist Igor Novikov. So this principle suggests that time travel is possible, but only in ways that don't create contradictions. So in other words, if you were to travel back in time, you could never change history in a way that prevents you from actually making the trip in the first place. So the timeline is self-consistent. Causality is preserved no matter what. And this idea is actually rooted in Einstein's general theory of relativity, specifically in something called closed time-like curves, or otherwise known as CTCs. And these are solutions to Einstein's field equations that theoretically allow for loops in space-time. Now, if such loops exist, then time travel into the past isn't just possible, but it's actually mathematically allowed. But Novikov argued that even if these loops exist, physics would enforce consistency, meaning that everything that happens inside the loop must have already been accounted for in history, and therefore no paradoxes are allowed. So to break that down a little bit further, let's say that you decide to go back in time and stop your grandfather from meeting your grandmother. According to Novikov's principle, something will always prevent you from changing history in a way that creates a paradox. So for example, like maybe you would get delayed, maybe your time machine, quote unquote, would malfunction, or maybe without realizing it, you're actually the reason that they met in the first place. So no matter what you do, history remains self-consistent and you can interact with the past, but you cannot rewrite it. And so any action you take was actually always part of history, which led to the very events that you set out to change. And again, this is not just a theoretical idea. It has actually been tested in force experiments, like the time-traveling message paradox. So imagine that you are sat at your desk when, out of nowhere, this random note appears in front of you and it reads, "Don't forget to email your professor at 3 p.m. So you check the time, it's 2:55 p.m. and you're confused, but you're curious. So you decide to follow the note's instructions and you send the email at exactly 3 p.m. Now, later, as an experiment, you write the exact same note and send it back in time to 2:50 p.m. So you're looking at me so blankly. So think about what just happened, right? The note exists because you found it and you decided to send it back in time, but you only need to send it back because you had already received it. So there was actually never a point when someone originally wrote it. It simply exists as part of a closed time loop. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, like it's forever looping in time because
Who
I
the
get
fuck
it.
wrote it originally? Yeah.
Well, there's no original, it's just forever looping.
So this is how Novikov's principle works. So events inside a time loop do not create contradictions. Instead, they are self-consistent. So no matter what, the timeline will arrange itself so that everything will line up logically. And if you try to prevent something from happening, and if you try to change history somehow, the universe will ensure that you still end up playing your role in the event exactly as it was always meant to happen. And so this is the idea that the past is not rewritten, it's just reinforced.
Can I just like jump in here that like I find with physics is that it's so theory heavy. Like this principle, it could be a reality, but like surely there's absolutely no way of proving that.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll tell you about something related to that, because this was my question. I was like, okay, well, we can't just come up with a theory and be like, okay, here's a theory and like this is it, and like I'm just going to explain time travel now just with this random idea that I come up with. So I also thought the same thing. So in 2019, researchers at IBM conducted a quantum time travel simulation using a quantum computer. Now, they introduced paradoxical conditions, which is like sending information backwards in time in a way that would erase its own existence. But every time they did this, the system naturally adjusted itself to avoid contradiction. And the quantum states always corrected in a way that maintained self-consistency, as if reality has built-in error correction to prevent paradoxes, which is interesting if you listen to the simulation episode. But essentially, what I find this demonstrated is that it does happen, but I don't necessarily know if they understand like how and why it happens. I mean, this is kind of where I drew
simulation theory, isn't it?
It's giving simulation theory, 100%. But this is kind of where I drew my line of like, this is how much I'm going to understand. Do you know what I mean? I was like, okay, I understand this much and I'm drawing the line there. So if any of the listeners are interested in reading more about this, like please feel free, because I'm sure there probably is some people working on like the underlying maths and physics of this. Now, on that note, before we get deeper into how this connects to time travel, I have to be honest. As I said, I really struggled with researching this episode. I'm not going to lie. Like I obviously love science, but physics is really not my strong suit.
No.
And trying to wrap my head around relativity closed time-like curves, and quantum mechanics, let me tell you, my brain felt like it was overheating. And that is where 𝗾𝘃𝗃, today's episode sponsor, actually saved me. So instead of trying to read through pages and pages of dense physics papers, I used 𝗾𝘃𝗃 to listen to them instead. It takes complex academic research and turns it into structured audio so you can actually understand high-level concepts without spending hours decoding technical jargon and reading over the same sentence a million times. Because that's my issue, is like, when I'm reading something that's complicated, I will read this same sentence over and over again, and it's like my eyes are reading it, but my brain is not reading it. But if I'm listening to it, it just goes into my brain, like it's just straight in there.
Yeah, I'm 100% like that. Like, I'll listen to an audiobook and read the book at the same time, because it's like fully immersive experience, and you could obviously do that with 𝗾𝘃𝗃 as well. So if you're a PhD student, a researcher, or someone who just loves science but really struggles with the dense academic writing, which I 100% do, 𝗾𝘃𝗃 is actually a game changer, because you can listen to the papers whilst commuting, walking, or in Liv's case, while pacing around her kitchen trying to understand these time paradoxes.
They also have dyslexia-friendly fonts and note-taking features as well, making it one of the best tools out there for staying on top of research. And 𝗾𝘃𝗃 offers a 7-day free trial. So if you want to save time and actually absorb the research you need, we will add the link to 𝗾𝘃𝗃 in today's video or episode description. So make sure you head there to try it out. And we also have a discount code for you guys that will pop on screen now. But for now, let's get back to time travel. Now, we've spoke about Novikov's theory, but not all physicists agree with this approach. Some argue that self-consistency is just way too restrictive, and that time travel, if possible, would not be limited by an unchangeable timeline. So instead, they propose an alternative, one that allows for changes to the past without violating causality. And this brings us to the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Unlike Novikov's principle, which assumes a single self-consistent timeline, the many worlds interpretation suggests that every possible outcome of an event actually happens, but in separate parallel universes. You knew we were going to talk about parallel universes on this episode, because how could we not? Now, this idea stems from one of the most famous experiments in quantum mechanics. I'm so sorry, but we're back with the double slit experiment. If you listened to the simulation episode, you heard about the double slit experiment. I gave a very detailed explanation of that experiment in that episode. So if you want a detailed explanation, then make sure you listen to the simulation episode. And you should just listen to it anyway, because I'm biased, but I think it was the best episode on this series, because, well, I'm not saying, oh, my episode was better than yours.
I'm not offended, it was really good.
I just meant that, like, I enjoyed the science of that episode so much. So the idea of the experiment is that you have a barrier in between, essentially like you and a wall, and you're firing electrons or photons at this barrier. Now, there are 2 holes in the barrier, and basically scientists were measuring how the electrons or the photons passed through these 2 barriers and what kind of pattern they produced on the wall behind. Now, the double slit experiment revealed that particles, like electrons or photons, do not behave like balls with fixed paths. Instead, they acted like waves existing in multiple states at once. So when an electron was sent through 2 slits, it didn't just go through one or the other, it actually went through both of them simultaneously, creating what's known as an interference pattern. But the moment we measure or observe the electron, it chooses a single path, as if reality is only decided when we look at it. Now, some physicists take this a step further and suggest that reality isn't fixed until it's observed, meaning every possible path still exists somewhere in another universe. Applying this to time travel, the many worlds interpretation suggests that if someone were to travel back in time and alter the past, they wouldn't change their own timeline, but instead they would create an entirely new branch, a separate universe where their changes took effect. The original timeline remains unchanged, while the traveler finds themselves in a parallel reality. This would mean that time travel doesn't break causality, because rather than altering an existing history, it simply shifts the traveler into a different version of events. And this raises an unsettling question. If time travel has ever happened, we would never know, because our timeline would remain untouched. And if that's the case, is it really time travel, or just an extremely complex way of moving between parallel worlds?
I actually feel like I want to align myself with the parallel universe theory, because I feel like You know, we touched on this on simulation theory about Mandela effects, and loads of people say that we entered a different, like a parallel universe when, as a result of these like Mandela effects. So like there's no evidence of it in our history, but people still remember it because like they've shifted into a parallel universe. That's like my conspiracy theorist hat on. And obviously going back to Brian Cox, I've seen him do talks before and he talks about parallel universes. So I feel like he backs this theory as well. So if he backs it, I back it.
If Brian Cox backs it, we back it. So Cultured backs it.
Literally. So, okay, just to kind of sum up, time travel into the future, absolutely possible in terms of like what is kind of allowed by physics and gravity and speed and all that sort of stuff. Absolutely possible. But time travel into the past seems kind of like hard to say.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. And that's before we even talk about the biggest problem, right? Which is like, even if time travel to the past is possible, like how would you even do it?
Oh my god, is this the part where we talk about wormholes?
Yes, we love a wormhole on this podcast. So the idea of wormholes comes straight from Einstein's equations. So in 1935, Einstein and physicist Nathan Rosen discovered that mathematically, space-time could, in theory, fold over itself and create a tunnel between two distant points. And these actually became known as Einstein-Rosen bridges, or what we now call wormholes. So we've said this analogy before, but you can imagine space-time as a two-dimensional sheet of paper. Now, if you want to travel from one side to the other, you'd normally have to cross the entire sheet. But if you fold the paper and punch a hole through it, you could jump instantly from one point to another. And that is the basic idea behind a wormhole. It's essentially a cosmic shortcut through space-time. Now, if wormholes exist, and let's just say that like there is actually no evidence for wormholes, so let's just put that out there right now. Again, we spoke about that on the Interstellar episode. But if wormholes do exist, and if one mouth of the wormhole is moving at relativistic speeds or placed in a strong gravitational field, time dilation would mean that the two ends of the wormhole experience time at different rates, right? This means that a traveler stepping into one end could theoretically exit at a different point in time. So like in other words, a wormhole might not just be a portal through space, but it is actually a time machine. But, and this is a big but, there is a huge problem because we have zero evidence that stable traversable wormholes actually exist. And even if they did, keeping them open long enough to travel through would require something that we don't actually know how to produce yet: negative energy.
What is that?
So negative energy is a bizarre concept that comes from quantum mechanics. Just like everything that comes from quantum mechanics is bizarre, I feel. But under certain conditions, quantum fluctuations can create regions of space with less than zero energy. Essentially, it's a vacuum that exerts repulsive gravity. And this kind of energy could, in theory, prevent a wormhole from collapsing, which would keep it stable for long enough to actually pass through. And some physicists suggest that the Casimir effect, which involves tiny quantum fluctuations between two closely spaced plates, might be evidence that negative energy is actually real. So without negative energy, any natural wormhole that formed would actually just collapse instantly. So even if one did exist, the gravitational forces inside would likely actually just rip apart anything trying to actually pass through it. So while they remain a fascinating theoretical possibility, there's actually no real path to making them work as time machines. At least not yet.
But I feel like we kind of have something similar to that in black holes, right? Because going back to our good friend Brian Cox, he definitely mentioned like warped time if you were to like approach a black hole. What is that? Is that related to that in any way?
Yeah, and again, I think we did speak about this a little bit on the Interstellar episode, but there is the idea of using rotating black holes. And some physicists speculate that if a black hole is spinning fast enough, it might actually create a stable, passable wormhole inside, meaning that yes, you could enter one side and emerge somewhere else. But again, this is purely theoretical. And even if this did exist, like a wormhole inside a spinning black hole, like even if it existed, we would literally have no clue how to navigate it without being crushed. So the short answer is no, we can't use wormholes or black holes for time travels, at least not yet. But the long answer is maybe we could if we ever figure out how to generate and control negative energy, or if new physics reveals stable, traversable wormholes. I mean, the idea isn't totally off the table, but for now, unless you're willing to take a one-way trip into the distant future by hovering near a black hole, time travel remains stuck in theory, not reality.
Oh, I'm kind of sad about that.
I mean, same, because I'd love to go back in time and change a few things, you know?
I always feel like no regrets. I wouldn't want to...
No regrets.
No regrets. Yeah.
So we've talked about time travel, but let's zoom out, like way out. So the universe itself has a clock, and that clock started ticking 13.8 billion years ago with the Big Bang. Before that, as far as we can tell, time literally didn't exist. But if time had a beginning, does that mean it could also have an end? Well, right now, physicists think there are 3 main ways the universe could end, and each one has massive implications for time itself. So first up, we have the Big Crunch theory, and this is the idea that the universe will eventually collapse back in on itself, essentially reversing the Big Bang. And if this happens, time itself would literally end as the universe reaches a singularity, just like the one that birthed it. And some theories even suggest that if the universe collapses in a big crunch, another Big Bang might actually follow, essentially restarting time in an endless cycle. And if that's true, then maybe time is just an infinite loop playing over and over. So, like, is time itself a closed loop? I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting concept. But having said that, right now, that isn't the leading theory. And that brings us on to the big freeze, because right now, the universe is expanding and galaxies are moving far away from each other. Space itself is also stretching. But what's weird is that this expansion is also accelerating. So instead of slowing down due to gravity, something is actually pushing the universe outward, like faster and faster. And that something is dark energy. And if this keeps going, we'll get what's called the big freeze. So here is what happens. Essentially, as galaxies spread apart, stars will run out of fuel and burn out. Black holes will slowly evaporate through Hawking radiation. And eventually all that's left will be a cold, dark, lifeless universe.
Well, that's depressing.
And at this point, time wouldn't stop exactly, but it would lose all meaning. And again, we're here back with the philosophical questions. But if time is defined by change, by events happening, if nothing is happening, there's no movement, no energy, and no interactions, then is time even moving? Is time even a thing anymore? And then this is our last idea. What if dark energy doesn't just keep the universe expanding, but it actually grows stronger over time? Now, this is the idea behind the Big Rip, and it is terrifying. So right now, dark energy is pushing galaxies apart at an accelerating rate, but in a Big Rip scenario, it wouldn't stop there. Instead, it would continue to strengthen it until it's not just expanding space, but it's literally tearing apart everything inside it. Eventually, it would go even deeper, ripping apart molecules, atoms, and then even the fundamental particles that make up reality. And finally, dark energy would unravel the very fabric of space-time itself. And if this happens, time wouldn't just stop, but it would cease to exist altogether. So if time has a beginning and an end, can we ever truly time travel, or are we just passengers on like a one-way journey through time with literally no control? In a big crunch scenario, maybe time, like I said, loops back on itself, meaning past and future could just be different cycles of the same repeating universe, which is scary. And if that's true, perhaps time travel isn't about jumping to another moment, but instead it's waiting for the cycle to restart. And in a big freeze, time might just stretch out forever, but eventually it just literally wouldn't matter anymore because there's nothing left to experience it. And in a big rip, time wouldn't just stop, it would literally be ripped out of existence, and there would be nothing left to even travel through. So right now, we do not know which of these futures will happen, but one thing is clear, time is not something we just move through. It's something that could one day end, and that might just be the biggest time travel paradox of all. Mic drop.
Oh my god. I've come away thinking like time travel is going forward in time, absolutely possible. Backwards in time, there's no real evidence necessarily that it would be possible. That's how I
Mhm.
feel anyway. I don't know how you feel, Liv.
I feel the same, but I'm also a fan of the parallel words, the many worlds interpretation. I'm a fan of that, and I
Yeah.
think I'd love to dive a little bit more into the parallel universes. So we'll definitely have to cover that in like a future episode, probably in a different series. But yeah, for the listeners, of course, as we do every single week, we will pop a poll on our Instagram. So you'll have to come over and let us know what you think of the conspiracy theory around time travel. I mean, your answers will probably be a little bit more nuanced than just like a yes or no, but come over and get involved anyway. So with that, that rounds off the science for today's episode. And I think we have a listener story that we really need to get into. So let's get into the laboratory section of today's episode.
Okay, we've had a listener write in, and the subject line is betrayed by my lab bestie. So let's get into the email. In 2023, I began my master's in another university across the country. I ended up joining a lab who took 3 master's students in one go. And it was exciting because we were all girls in STEM and we're all the same age. And one would have assumed that we would have been so close given the proximity and common interests. However, that is not what happened. One of the girls who was at this uni since undergrad was extremely insecure in herself and her abilities, and kind of felt threatened by me since I wasn't like stupid, I guess. However, it wasn't just a little jealousy. She shit-talked me to the entire department before anyone even got to know me, and it was actually so bad, and I felt so lonely. It was such a horrible experience, and I felt anything I did was just not good enough. Even after speaking to her numerous times, it never got better. And the only thing that made it better was honestly completely removing myself and finishing my lab work earlier and just working from home. And even though I love my project and supervisor, I never considered staying for my PhD since she's also staying, and I cannot go through that for my mental health. Toxic lab culture is honestly so unhealthy, and I honestly hate it.
Oh, that is a lot. That is a lot. I feel like we've done so many stories recently about... Sorry, my cat's just coming to join us. We've done so many stories recently about toxic labs, toxic academic culture. And I honestly feel like this is just going to be a running theme on the podcast. For as long as we're doing these laboraTEAs, like it is going to be a running theme because it's just so common. For me, honestly, I can't lie. The most disappointing thing about this story is the fact that there was like 3 of you girls, you all started out together and you didn't become besties. I don't know why I feel like that is the most painful part of this story because, you know, women in STEM, we should be supporting each other and like uplifting each other.
Yeah, I do definitely think like being in science is like weirdly competitive. Like some other people are just so competitive about what they want to achieve, and it's like,
oh my god, because do you remember my friend stole my research idea laboraTEA from last season, where like her friend literally stole her whole idea.
Research
so like
idea.
Not only are we not like supporting and uplifting each other, but we're actually backstabbing each other, because this girl even said that the other girl was like shit talking her to the whole department.
Yeah, literally. I'm like, it's hard enough being women in STEM. Like, we don't need to pitch against each other. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't make
literally
any sense. I feel like if people work together more in the labs, you'd actually get so much more done. Like, I went from a very non-collaborative lab, and it was literally just me doing stuff. And then I've since moved to a lab that's quite collaborative and everybody's kind of willing to help out. And you obviously are then part of so many more projects because you help other people, they help you. And it's like you kind of expand your own experience. And also, if you help enough, then you get your names on more papers. So it's just like, come on, like, let's just all work together. And then it builds up like your experience and your academic CV because you got more papers published and stuff. Also,
Yeah,
don't
that's
you
literally
think that
so
the
true.
science world is like so heavy on networking and collaborations? Like in academia, it's really good to have these like
Mm,
networking opportunities, because if you meet people, that's how you create new projects and apply for new grants. Like if you're just stuck within your own sort of institute, then those opportunities never come about. So if you're this person who's like shit talking someone else in the lab, then no one's going to want to collaborate with you. Just saying.
100%, 100%. And like, what is she even saying about you? Because what have you even got to say about? Because she said she works from home, so I'm assuming they're like not even really in the lab. I'm assuming they're bioinformatics, but everything you said still stands, because obviously I was fully computational, and like my
Yeah.
supervisor was very good at
Well, she
encouraging
said that
collaborations.
she would go in early to finish lab work, or she finished lab
Oh
work
yeah,
early.
true,
Yeah.
true.
But
But
still, I just
anyway,
don't understand.
what is she even possibly saying about you? That to the point where she has to go and talk to other people in the department. Do you know what I mean? Like, I get maybe
Mm,
talking to people in your office and having a little gossip. I mean, personally, me, I wouldn't do it. Like, I definitely don't gossip about like other students and people on my level. I
no.
mean, yeah, maybe in my office we have a little gossip about the PIs, can't I?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's got to be done. But like, we're definitely not like gossiping about like other people on our level or like below us. That's
No.
weird.
No
Because
shit
like,
talking either. Like,
yeah. But one thing I will say is like, I'm so glad that she decided not to stay in this lab, because I think so many people just think, okay, it's so easy if I just stay in this lab. I've got an easy
mm-hmm.
PhD position like lined up for me. But I'm so glad that you didn't commit to like another 3 to 7 years, depending on like where you're from. Because like if you're in the US, that's like 7 years, right, to do a
Yeah,
PhD.
I think
But if you're in
so.
the UK, 3 years. But either way, I'm still so happy that you decided to just get out of there and not commit
Yeah.
to like another 3 years.
Yeah, but she didn't say that she was going to do a PhD somewhere else. So I hope it hasn't tainted your entire view of it. Like, fair enough, don't do your PhD there, but don't let it put you off doing a PhD. Like, don't let this girl
Altogether,
get a one
literally,
up on
this
you
one
and kick
girl.
you out of academia because she's not nice. Like, don't let her win, babes.
Nah, I fully agree. Like, you can leave academia after you've done the PhD, because I'm fully here for that. But I say that I literally work in academia, but
Yeah.
yeah, no, I agree. I do want to know. Yeah, I wonder what is she doing now.
Mm.
I'd love to hear from some people in industry as well, because I reckon some raunchy gossip goes down in industry.
Yeah,
Do
100%.
you know what I mean? Because I don't think we've ever had any like industry listeners write in. Like, it's always academia, and like we always get the
Maybe that
toxic.
says a lot more about academia.
Yeah, this is true. But I feel like no, I think there's some good gossip that goes on in industry. So like,
Yeah.
yeah, if you're
It's always
listening
the
and you're
work
someone who,
Christmas parties as well.
no, we've spoke about this before. The work Christmas parties are crazy. Some random stuff goes down at work Christmas parties. So if you are someone who works in industry and you have any of that gossip to share with us, maybe it is one of your crazy Christmas work party stories, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe, I don't know, just like some random office gossip. Let us know, because we need to start figuring out and understanding what gossip goes on in industry compared to academia. You can find the anonymous link in today's episode description or video description if you're watching on YouTube, or you can just email us at soculturedpodcast@gmail.com, whatever you prefer. But with that, that rounds off episode 5 of Debunked. So we will see you guys in next week's episode, where, Taz, what are we going to be covering?
Yeah, we're going to go back to the virus and COVID theme, and we're going to be talking all about microchips and vaccines. But for now, that is the end of episode 5, and we will see you guys in next week's episode.
Wendy, say goodbye.
Bye.